Well, Garrett,
Yeah.
we're back with another episode of the Digital Drive-In podcast, aren't we? Where we talk about our favorite movies and why we love them. Isn't that right? Isn't that what we do?
That is what we do.
We're doing something different today, aren't we? This is the first time we're talking about a sequel. What sequel are we talking about? We've never really talked about one like in depth like this, especially one-to-one. We already did an episode on.
Yeah, not for an entire episode. No, but we've talked about sequels.
Sure.
Back to the Future 2.
Wow. We already know what Back to the Future 1 is about, Garrett, because we did a podcast on it and all of our loyal listeners listened to that episode, right?
All two of them.
Sons of bitches. But what's Back to the Future Part 2 about, Garrett? We're back. Back to the Future. Back again in another episode of the Back to the Future podcast.
Well, I mean, it picks up, if you've seen the first movie, it picks up with the end of the first movie, and they literally go to the future. The future of 2015.
Gosh, it's so far away.
October 26th, 2015, if I remember correctly.
That is indeed the day. And then they get into many various wacky hijinks in the future, don't they?
Yeah, it's almost like Doc is Marty's like chauffeur. He just drives him around in the whole movie.
Pretty much. Now, Garrett, what do you think about Back to the Future Part 2?
I haven't rated it as highly as you do. Yeah. And of the trilogy, especially if you look at it as a standalone film, it's my least favorite, even though I still really like it.
Sure.
I kind of think I wish 2 and 3 were all one movie.
Yeah.
I mean, in the way they're filmed, it's all like one movie. All
right.
3 of them.
Right.
But I think my least favorite idea through the entire trilogy is going into the future. Just because fundamentally anything you change or do in the future, as soon as you go back to your own time, it's meaningless. It didn't do anything.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like erases the events of the film you just watched, right?
Yeah. So it's sort of like it. I mean, it's almost like the trope of at the end of the movie, all this stuff happens to the character, and it was only a dream. There's very few movies or TV shows that can pull off "it was only a dream" very well.
Sure, and I mean, I
so
hate
this whole thing of like,
I think I've talked about it before with like Nicolas Cage's Next, whether it's on this podcast or another one with shit like that, and I just absolutely hate that trope. But I kind of think this one does it all right. Maybe
I mean,
it's not necessarily a dream. Like those events still happened; they were fixed, but they still happened.
Well, again, if you are using the third film in the trilogy, it's character development. Even though while watching it as a standalone film, it doesn't really feel like it goes anywhere. It feels like it kind of spins its wheels a little bit. Where you're like, what difference does it make that they've gone through this, since it doesn't really do anything? But it's developing a character of Marty who almost kind of didn't have any flaws really in the beginning in the first film. So it's like developing him out of something he has to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
So I can understand why they did it. But I just, even though some of the things about, hey, that didn't happen like that in the future, or haha, look at that joke, they did fine. But I just feel like story-wise, there wasn't a whole lot for me really to grab into until they go to, Trump's America.
Right. I'm sure we'll get to that in just a little bit. We've talked about it on a past episode, so maybe we won't spend too much time on it, but it's definitely worth touching on.
But it's like,
you mean.
Yeah, it's one of the things that you said, though, the fact that sequels are so difficult to pull off correctly, because it's like, if you do the thing that was made the first movie popular, then you could just be blamed as doing the same thing over again. Right. And if you change the formula too much, then they're like, why did you put it in this series when it really doesn't fit?
Mm-hmm.
So it really does hit that sweet spot of doing enough new and different things, but also using that same formula and the same things that worked in the first movie. So it's like, I still like the movie a great deal. Where does it fit in the trilogy in your estimation?
It's either second or third. I don't know. The two of them kind of fluctuate back and forth. I'll have to watch the third one again, I think, but this one was actually a lot, not than I remember, but a lot more fun than I remember. It's just because I think maybe it feels like being such a huge fan of the first one, it obviously kind of being my favorite movie of all time. There's so much fun little stuff and callbacks and throwaway things when they're running around especially in 1955. It's like it's kind of fun, and I think it's executed really well, which is why it kind of strikes a chord with me. I think more than number 3 does, simply because it's kind of that you can almost think of, well, was all this happening anyway? Like if you go back and watch Back to the Future 1, was Marty from Back to the Future 2 there at the same time? But I don't know. I think that kind of gives it a little bit of an edge above part 3 for me. Just the fact that it's got those wacky, all over the place hijinks, which I kind of enjoy a little bit. Plus, we get to see a lot of different versions of Biff and a lot of different versions of Marty, which I find to be fucking hysterical. But at the same time, Back to the Future Part 3, and maybe eventually we'll do an episode on it, is it's wild too. Yeah, I get it. Wild West. But it's like,
I got it.
It's awesome. Like that, like I love that one too. So, and that one's fun and exciting. And again, it takes the sort of the same formula and it throws it in a different time period, which I think maybe could have been what they had done. Maybe if they did like 15 movies or whatever, they just jumped around to different time periods. I think the animated series might have been like that.
Kind of turns into Quantum Leap at that point, though, right?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. But I think in that sense, number 3 is really interesting in that it has a lot of Western callbacks as well, like stuff to Leone and some of the Westerns of the older age, obviously with the big reference being that Fistful of Dollars reference. But
right.
So they kind of float around for me up and down, 2 and 3. A 1 will always be the top, obviously, but I think that they're both 2 and 3 are both very excellent movies that are
yeah. I mean,
have their ups and downs in both regards.
Right. And 1 was so self-contained, if you never got another film, it wouldn't matter necessarily. Who would you say is the main character of the second film?
Still Marty. Maybe more so than the first one.
Yeah, it kind of seems like everyone is almost relegated to a co-starring.
Yeah. I think Marty's kind of the lead of this one, especially because they throw like 8 different Michael J. Foxes at you. But honestly, I think George is the protagonist of the first one. So, while it's kind of like a Ferris Bueller thing, where the story's about Cameron, but we see it through Ferris Bueller's eyes.
Right.
I think Back to the Future 1 is kind of about, or like a Great Gatsby kind of thing too, right? Back to the Future 1 is like it's about George, but we see it through Marty's eyes. I think Back to the Future 2 is wholly Marty, almost start to finish.
I would agree with that.
And then Back to the Future 3 is obviously Doc's story. So,
right.
Yeah, I would say this is Marty's story. I mean, you would call him the protagonist at face value immediately, but I think more so than others, this is his film.
Because they're developing his characterization way more in this film, even than they did in the previous.
Sure.
What do you think about Michael J. Fox playing the different roles? Did you like that? Did you think it was funny?
Yeah, it's kind of hilarious, isn't it? Just to see him. I mean, his son is pretty much just an idiot version of Marty, but like old Marty, I think is kind of funny. And then the funniest one is obviously his daughter, but she doesn't really do anything.
Right.
I don't know why they did it. I think Michael J. Fox just wanted to have fun, and I think it's hilarious. I think. I don't know about you.
Yeah, no, I do think it's. I mean, it's definitely played for laughs. Like his son is watching all the different channels on the TV, and Marty comes in and says something. I was trying to remember the exact way he worded it. Something like, "Oh, you gonna watch a little bit of TV, huh? It's good for a change," or whatever.
It's almost like you spend all your time outside. You should be watching more TV.
And I like how it has the futuristic tech is still kind of broken. Right. So it's like the fruit comes down and he's like, retract. And it's like that it finally figures to go back up. And like they're saying fruit. Like, Mom, you rehydrate the best pizza.
That line, that's funny. It's a funny one. You hydrate the best pizza, Mom. That's been hilarious.
Do you think it hurts the fact that Crispin Glover isn't in this?
I see. I don't know what size of a role they would have had for him in the film, in like the original script, if they could have used him. But I don't really think it hurts that much, and it doesn't feel like anything's really missing. I think they kind of use. I think they kind of use George's death as a driving force for Marty. Obviously, now I don't know if they would have done that if Crispin was still in it, but it certainly feels natural because of how, again, focused the first one was on George. It almost makes it seem like Marty's efforts and pursuits from the first film were worthless when George is just killed. So it's kind of like you gotta make things right again, Marty.
Right, yeah, that gives him the drive, the motivation to do.
Mm-hmm.
To be a little more aggressive in this one, perhaps.
Yeah. And he does some super sleuthing. He's got like the fedora on and everything.
That was great. Yeah, that buy clothing that will help you fit in.
He buys like sneak clothing.
It's like wearing the World is Carmen Sandiego clothing. I think the whole walkie-talkie routine he keeps having with Doc is hilarious.
The walkie-talkie, yeah, that's pretty funny.
Of course, that's back in 1955.
I'm trying to remember the walkie-talkie stuff. Honestly, I just watched it today.
Well, it's like Marty is like stuck in the garage, and he wants Doc to come get him, and Doc is not supposed to. He can't just drive the DeLorean there. Right. But then when Doc gets there, and he's like, he keeps talking to him on the walkie-talkie when he's in the back of Biff's car, and Biff thinks there's something wrong with the radio.
That's funny. Oh yeah, I remember that now. Or how about, do you like the part where Doc encounters himself at the clock tower?
Yeah, that's good. It's interesting too. In the original movie, there is a guy in the background with a coat like that.
Yeah, I think they're trying to tie it in there like that, which leads to what I was saying earlier with like, I wonder if you can watch number 1 and be like, oh, there's Marty from number 2.
Well, but they didn't plan on it.
I know.
Yeah, so it would just be coincidental. I mean, the whole thing, because of the fact that going to the future, like Doc should know going to the future and changing something and then coming back to the past would render it irrelevant. So, and he already went further into the future to see what would happen.
Right.
You know, so it does make one wonder how much Doc is manipulating things. Like, is it payment back for Marty saving his life? He's going to fix all the terrible things that Marty's going to have in the future by having him learn how to be a more responsible person.
I never really thought about that. Yeah. He's kind of like, thank you for saving my life. Now I'm going to give you a better one.
Yeah, it's sort of like he realizes that it's not really going to be the end of the universe if somebody does something, but he has to have Marty under the impression of all this stuff. I mean, especially, like, of course, we'll get to it at another time, but the whole, I'm going to destroy the time machine, I'm going to destroy the time machine. Oh, look, I built an even better time machine.
Right. What do you think of some of the other connections to the first film, like the chase scene that takes place during Johnny Be Good?
Oh, at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance?
Yeah, they kind of use that dance as another set piece in this one, eh?
Right.
Do you think that it's a little too much? Do you think it rides off the coattails of the first one too much? Because I think it's kind of quirky fun. Like it's kind of like, hey, get it? The first one.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those things. If the entire movie was just that premise, that would get really old, I think. I mean, it's like, it's interesting for like 30 minutes, but if you did that for an hour and a half, I don't know if that would play off real well.
Right.
But it's like how they fit it in and how they were able to build upon what was in the first movie is really cool.
Yeah.
It does drive you crazy the more you notice things about the first movie and then realize that they, things changed a little bit in the second one. But it also just be flavor. And to wonder how many times is Doc making Marty do this until he gets it right.
Right, yeah. Do you think if Marty messed anything up, Doc would just travel back in time and give him like another go at it?
I don't know. It does make you wonder.
Yeah. Like, because Marty almost doesn't get the almanac, right?
Right.
Do you think Doc would just like travel back to before he starts to try to get the almanac and pop up and just be like, oh, it's the same Doc from earlier. Just, maybe you should try this instead. Because obviously it'd be just that Doc traveling back to the same one Marty, right? Could work. I don't know. The time travel logistics in this film are very complex, I'd say, aren't they?
I don't know. I mean,
I think it's kind of the thing with time travel is just don't think about it and you're okay.
Yeah.
I think that's who said that. Was it Ryan Johnson that said that about Looper?
Yeah, about Looper, the fuckhead.
Well, on one hand, he is kind of like, I understand trying to analyze how the time travel works, and that could be an interesting point to take to the film. But on the other hand, if you just look at things at surface value, if you ignore like, well, that wouldn't happen all the times, it would be a little bit more entertaining for you. But I know you're a cynical old fuck that can't look past that shit. So,
well, that's the thing. I mean, to me, isn't that what makes the great writers and great directors different from the average? I mean, if that's the case, then why can't you just be entertained with anything that's on the screen?
Yeah. Well, in that case too, with that, what I was saying, that's what makes this film so good, is because every single time something happens with time travel, you'd be like, well, of course that would work in that way. Like everything makes sense.
Well, it's once. I mean, like they have that thing that's like the ripple effect. Whereas it seems like if you change something in the past, it should be like instantaneous because none of the other stuff has happened yet. So it's like, how is it that Biff was able to go from 55 to his same future?
Mm-hmm.
That's like once he gave him the book, as long as no one else interfered with him learning about the book or knowing that that's what he wanted to do, it would instantaneously change the entire future.
Mm-hmm.
And then it makes, like, I mean, that's kind of what happened to Marty. It's like he was starting to disappear and didn't do anything in the first film, and then George kisses Lorraine, and then everything is fine again. But it's like
swaps back up. Earth Angel, Earth Angel.
Right. But it's like he was going to do that anyway. Marty didn't suddenly do something to make him kiss her.
Right.
So it's like, why was he disappearing to begin with? When if everything would have went like it was going. I
wonder if it's almost like that's because I forget what it is. Is it Doctor Who that says that there's like you can change things in between defining moments in time, but those defining moments you can't change really. So maybe that like everything, all of the future hinged on that one moment, that kiss kind of thing. Didn't matter that he helped George get the date. All that mattered was that happened on that time. Because remember in number one, Lorraine always goes, your father kissed me for the very first time at that dance. Like that's the big moment. It wouldn't happen.
Right.
Of course, Marty's going to disappear until he gets that kiss, until George kisses Lorraine there.
Okay, if that's the case, let me ask you this question. Once Marty and his girlfriend Jennifer leave 1985 to go to the future, how is there anyone there to begin with?
What do you mean?
So, like, if you think about it in Twin Peaks terms, once Marty stops existing in 1985 to go to the future, he would be a missing person for 20 years.
Right. Well, it's all a matter because what time does he return? That's the question. What time does he come back? In Back to the Future 3, what time does he end up back at his house?
Right, but Back to the Future 3 hasn't happened yet.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that it's kind of like Doctor Who logic again, where it's like they would leave 1985 and then in 2 seconds later they would reappear.
Right,
for
but
them,
they have
for them it was in 1985 it was 2 seconds, but for Marty and them it was a long strand of time.
Marty would have had to have gone to the future and come back first for it to have happened that way, and then done it a second time in order to have still been there. If this was the first time of him going into the future, it would just be because remember in the first movie, Einstein disappears for that minute. He skipped over it to go to the future. There was no Einstein in existence until he reappeared back in the DeLorean. So that same logic should apply in the second film.
Yeah, but what I'm saying,
that as soon as Marty leaves,
that
he skips over those.
Yeah, but Doc planned him to come back a minute later, right?
Right.
So if Marty just shows up a minute later, but nobody's going to be like, oh, man, where'd Marty go for that minute? Where was he? They're just going to be like, oh, they must be around the corner fucking or some shit like that. Just because he's gone for if they return to 1985 at this time, at this minute, and Marty runs back in the house, it could be like, oh, where were you, Marty? I was outside for literally a fucking minute. Why are you worried about me? You know what I mean? Like if Doc and Marty weren't there with Einstein and Einstein leaves and comes back and they didn't know, they wouldn't know.
Yeah, but
that he was gone in the first place. It's been such a short period of time between him leaving, between like them perceiving Einstein leaving and Einstein coming back, that if they weren't to see that, they would have never have known he was gone in the first place.
Right, because in the first movie, we see everything not from Einstein's point of view, but from the people who's waiting.
Like, so I think that Einstein could have gone 50 years into the future and then returned to that point if somebody was there, that point in time. But then, so say Doc went with Einstein. They went 50 years into the future. Doc programmed it. They came 50 years back, but it was only a minute for Marty time. So they experienced that traveling into the future and traveling back. Marty didn't experience it at all. You know what I mean?
Right. So George and Lorraine and other people, if you were to go into the future and then come back, it would just seem like you were gone a minute or instantaneous. Yeah. Because but from the point of view of the time traveler, it would seem like he was gone for that amount of time. Right. So we're following Marty and Doc and Jennifer.
Mm-hmm.
So it shouldn't seem like instantaneously as soon as they get to the future, they're there already. Okay. Because from that timeline, they disappeared with Doc in the sky in 1985, and they haven't come back yet because that part hasn't happened. So as soon as they got to the future, they would be missing because nothing has happened yet. Because we're viewing it from them as the time traveler, from their viewpoint, and not from the viewpoint of the people.
But is time kind of like at some point in time they do return to that moment, and now they're just exist like they travel to 2015, but like in the 2015 they travel to, they have already went back to 1985. You know what I mean? In that way, it's like a circle. We're kind of just like lifting them up and moving them over on a line, right?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I know like originally the theme of this movie was supposed to be paradox, or like the title of the movie was supposed to be paradox.
Right. Because it is confusing as hell.
Well, it's not that it's confusing, it's that it doesn't have any logical sense because time travel isn't possible except going 1 second for 1 second into the future.
Right. Or an
I mean, there's really... Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you could even say, like, I mean, time only exists as a social construct, really, because time is relative depending on what planet you're on. The daylight doesn't exist the same amount of time. I mean, on planet Earth, daylight doesn't exist the same amount of time.
I've seen Interstellar.
Whatever. You know, so it's like, it's something that we've agreed upon as saying that this is what happens. But on a cosmic scale and different things, it doesn't actually happen that way. So I could understand that. Right. But it's like time itself, it's not like gravity or something that actually has, I don't even want to say quantifiable because you can quantify things, but it doesn't like have an essence that you can do something with. It's like present. What does present mean? Present doesn't mean right now because that's already gone. So it's almost like there's only past and future. There's only things that will happen and have already happened because it's like no such it's like as soon as you get the thought completely out, everything's already gone past. You can't like stop anything. You can't go, wait a minute.
Well, the second you speak, like those words are already in the past, even though it's like milliseconds behind you.
Right. You know, and the same thing, like if you're going in the quantum thing, the fact of like the synapses of my brain firing and the thought coming to my brain and then me being able to speak it, like all that stuff has already happened as well.
Right.
And then sound doesn't travel as fast as light. So by the time you actually hear what it is and then contemplate what it is that I'm saying and translate it into words that you can now understand as well, like so much time has already passed. Mm-hmm. But we're not smoking pot, so this is a completely different podcast. Well, I'm not anyway.
Well, it's weird. It's almost like you need... I'm not either. Fuckhead. It's almost, even though it is legal here, even you almost need like a chalkboard to talk about this film, right? And it's time to talk about the logistics. It's just time travel in the film. Because like it's weird because Doc even brings out the chalkboard at one point and he does the whole alternate path thing, right?
Right.
Where he talks about they have a straight line with 55, 85. Can you hear me? Can you hear me writing it out?
I can hear you, yes.
Because I am. 55, 85, and 15, but at some point it splits off into an alternate version of 85.
Right.
85A.
Yeah, and what's interesting is we've already experienced an alternate timeline from the first movie.
Right. As short as it can. Well, yeah, because there was the original timeline, but then there's the changed timeline that Marty's now living in, right?
Right.
Time travel is fun, isn't it?
So Marty Prime doesn't even exist anymore.
You are correct. Well, no, he does. This Marty Prime is the because Marty still has the memories of the first of the Prime timeline, right?
Right. But it's like
so Marty Prime is the one that we have, and
that's
the original Prime timeline is completely gone, and now there's timeline A, let's say, and then timeline B stands for timeline Biff or timeline Butthead.
So really, Marty Prime is the only one from that universe that knows anything.
Doc doesn't. Yeah, you're right. Marty Prime is the only one in the entire trilogy that knows the original events of the first film before Doc is shot. He's the only one that has any memory of that. Not even of the film, of before the film, of that world. He's the only one with a memory of a loser George McFly, right? Of a loser family altogether. So it's interesting. He's got to bear that burden. It's almost like Rick and Morty when they did you see the one where they with the Cronenbergs?
Yes, that was hilarious.
When they fuck up their timeline and they have to go find another one.
Yeah,
it's almost like that. They're the only two people in that world that know, one, that the Rick and Morty of that world are dead, but two, that there's an entire alternate reality of that world that was completely destroyed and turned into Cronenberg monsters, and they're from that world, and they came over and took over the dead corpses. Like, those two are the only ones that know it. In the same way as Marty Prime here is the only one that knows the events of the before the first film. Now,
man, it makes you wonder where Dan Harmon got that idea from.
Well, The Adventures of Doc and Marty, yeah, whatever. I know you were making a sly little joke, but it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because then, well, Back to the Future 3 really doesn't do any of that timeline fuckiness, does it?
Right.
So essentially what? We have Prime, we have A, we have B over the course of 1 and 2. Prime is destroyed after the events of Back to the Future, so we're left with A. When old Biff travels back in time and gives young Biff the almanac, timeline B is created where Biff becomes Trump. So what? When Marty travels back to timeline A 1955, right? Or would it be timeline B 1955? It would be timeline A 1955 before it converges into timeline B.
Right, because
he stops Biff from getting the almanac.
But he creates timeline C because things happen that weren't in the original timeline A.
But timeline C is almost parallel to or identical to timeline A, just with a small slight convergence, right? Or no, because now timeline C would be what we don't see of the fixed Marty future, right? Of a better Marty future.
Well, no, timeline C is the one that Doc now no longer exists past a certain point and is back in the Old West.
Right. Well, that could almost be put into timeline A, and he just disappeared and went back. I don't think, does there need to be a completely different timeline of that, is what I'm wondering. Because if you think of Doc and you think of Marty and all of them of just points on the line and you move them around, you can move Doc back to 1855. No problem. You don't have to create another timeline for 1855. Man, I don't know.
I think you do, because the further you go back, like, the car is now there in the cave. I mean, I know a lot of this is happening in the third movie, but it's like a lot of the stuff changes because that's the only way the Marty Prime can get back to the future.
Right.
It's because of what was established through the Wild West Doc Brown.
So which timeline C has Doc's happy ending and thus Marty's happy ending.
Right, but remember, Doc dies in that timeline. So there's when Marty goes back, he creates a new additional timeline.
Holy shit! There's a timeline D.
Yeah, because Clara doesn't die and Doc doesn't die, and they have kids.
Holy shit! They fuck with the timelines a lot, so much they can call the Barry Allen. It's kind of crazy if you think about it. How deep does it go? But it's kind of really like a brain teaser trying to work it all out, isn't it? It's kind of fun. How does every event fit in to the other events in the other movies in terms of a timeline scale? Because then at the end of it all, we could basically say that because Jennifer and Marty have seen their future and decide to be more responsible, is that kind of assumed and thus have a better life, a better future. And then
I agree.
Doc, traveling back to 1855, he gets his happy ending with a wife and children and a train time machine to have fun animated adventures on.
Yeah, that's the thing, is like Doc basically exists out of time at this point.
Yeah, I would say so as well. But then would you say that, so this timeline D then, timeline D being Marty fixing his parents up, then Marty saving the world from Trump Biff, then Marty going back in time and saving Doc from dying in 1885. That would be timeline D, including their new, better future. So timeline D is almost new prime timeline, where everything is happy, and the two of them just are very selfish and use the time machine to make both of their lives way better.
Right, and this is the timeline where the future isn't written.
Right. This is kind of where we end it, right? In Back to the Future 3, is that foreseeably both of their futures are perfect for them, and it kind of bookends it, I think, quite nicely, right? And they both start off number one as kind of outcasts and losers, and they both ended as getting exactly what they want. So
yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. But
says Jennifer didn't like getting married at the Chapel of Love.
Well, it's because irresponsible, right? All she has to do, really, to Marty is say, "I don't want to get married at the Chapel of Love." Like, no shit. I don't want to have an asshole son. Let's just break up now and not have kids. That's the future, is that they just don't stay together because they've seen how fucking terrible of a future it is.
Yeah, and that's kind of the weird thing too. Like with that, it's like, why would they get married at the Chapel of Love? Because like Marty's parents, like, you know, his dad just had the book published deal, and they were like okay with him going to the lake with her. It's like, that would make way more sense if it was like the original timeline, unless they're just trying to say Marty like never grows out of that age.
I think that is what they're trying to say, and that's kind of the point of number 2, is that Marty, you have to grow up at some point, because I think he kind of stumbles. He turns into his dad his way through the first one. I think you're right. He does. Yeah, he does turn into his dad in the future, doesn't he?
Yeah, because Jennifer feels sorry for him getting in the accident, just like Lorraine felt sorry for George getting in a car accident.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's like he becomes a loser, and he can't do the one thing that he loved, which George loved to write, but never could do anything with it. Yeah. And so Marty lost the ability to play and never did anything with it. It's kind of like Marty overcompensated. It's like, and I think that's why they introduced the whole chicken concept, is because George would never do anything. He would never get out of his comfort zone. He would never try anything. That's why he didn't do very well and became a loser. Marty could be goaded into trying anything, regardless of how reckless it was. Therefore, he lost all the ability to do anything and was stunted because of it.
Right. Well, this has been, I think, a very interesting podcast so far, of talking about the very many timelines in this film. And if you're still listening, I hope you have held on to your butts a little bit there, because it's got a little wild.
That's what we do here.
And now I'm really interested to see with the time travel and how it's kind of executed in this film with all of that. And it's kind of a weird segue a little, I guess. Because I feel like they're kind of going to do stuff like this in Avengers Endgame. Kind of stuff where they have characters that we're following pop back to events of other movies and fuck around in them a little bit. But I don't know.
Does that make you happy or make you sad?
Well, it depends. If it's executed like Back to the Future 2, I think it would make me happy because it would be fun. But if it's just like, if it's not done well, it's kind of like, well, fuck you then. Why are you doing this at all? Right?
Right.
I mean, it literally just depends until we have to see the movie. I think they're going to do a time travel element to that movie. There's been like set photos of Cap in his Avengers 1 suit or whatever, which is what led people to believe that they're going to be kind of in the first film in some degree.
Well, and his haircut.
Yeah, and his haircut too. So I'm wondering what they're going to do. I think if they try to retcon everything through that, I think that's kind of dumb. But I think that if they just do new story events, but within the confines of the movies that have already happened, it could be interesting. It's bizarre. Again, Marvel's keeping that movie so close to their chest that we really have no idea what's going on. Like, did you hear the thing about all of the marketing is obviously they've said from the first 20 minutes of the movie, right? But apparently the Russos have said that there are only about 8 minutes of footage given to the trailer house from that first 20 minutes. So like there's only about 8 minutes total of the film in scattered portions. And I heard today that some of it is actually deleted material as well. It's not even in the movie.
Yeah, and they
trailer
did that before, where it was like they would make something specifically for the trailer.
Mm-hmm. Well, the big iconic shot of the Infinity War trailer of everybody sprinting towards the screen is not in that movie. It is not in that movie.
Right.
Or Hulk is in like a lot of the trailers for Infinity War, and he's not in that movie. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know how excited I am for this film, because I think that the whole Thanos storyline was done so well, and then now it's going to be like, let's go back to normal. And it's like, well, yeah, I don't really care too much to do that.
Obviously, they have to fix it in some degree. I think it's to what degree do they fix it? I think that without a doubt, and I think we might do a podcast on something related to Marvel to get them views. But
thanks, Rick.
Yeah, thanks. So I don't want to get too much into kind of that stuff, but sure. I do think that it's going to be. There's been very few exceptions, I think, where Marvel has full, like, wholesale let me down on a film I was absolutely excited for, if any. Like, I think when Marvel makes, like, is full blown dedicated to something, they have a tendency to kind of pull it off a little bit. It almost feels like at every single point in that universe where somebody in like the audience have said this film is impossible, they've made it possible. So I'm really intrigued in that aspect to see what they have set up for Endgame. I think they have. I'm more scared of what comes after Endgame. Is there consequences post Endgame or anything? I'm pretty sure people are going to die in this one, but we'll see. I don't want to get too much into a Marvel tangent right now, but
right, just in a very general sense. And I do this from comic book reading over multiple decades. Marvel is fantastic at building stories and making you want to know what comes next. They're not so great at finishing them and closing off great storylines.
Right. But is that maybe that's just a comic thing? Maybe the movies will be a little.
Yeah. No, I don't want to say that it's not something that they can't pull off.
This is basically the ending. This is basically the ending to 10 years, right? This is the ending to 21 films. So there's got to be a lot of payoffs in this thing, and it's going to be really bizarre. It's going to be really difficult to pull off, I think. And if they pull it off, it's going to be like, honestly, if they pull it off, should it be rewarded like Return of the King was? Like, this is just a cinematic feat, isn't it? Nothing has ever done 10 years long and 22 films long and told a cohesive entire narrative.
I mean, at this scale and this modern, no, but I mean, there have been tons of multiple movie serialized things, especially back in the old days.
Right. Well, maybe we'll touch on that more whenever we do our MCU or Avengers episode or something. It seems like a interesting topic to dive more into, but not within the confines of this. I wanted to just talk about it because it's something coming up that I think is going to use time travel, and I really hope they kind of execute it like they did in Back to the Future Part 2, because I think that it's really fun, and I think it's done very well.
It's not often you have the excuse to get to do that either.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
Did all the things they mentioned in the future come true?
I don't know. What did come true? I mean, the Cubs won the World Series in 2016, not 2015. I would say that's close enough.
And Miami did eventually get a baseball team.
That is true.
Jaws, what was it?
Jaws 19.
19. that they never had that many sequels.
But they do
Max
have
Spielberg
with that ridiculous amount of sequels. Like, again, back to the MCU, right?
Right.
Maybe Jaws 19 was just predicting the future of blockbusters being massive, continuous, borderline run to the ground franchises.
No, yeah, because they got Spielberg involved.
Yeah. Max Spielberg. Do you think he purposely didn't name his kid Max because of that movie? Or if he had a kid named Max, if he was like, fuck dad, now I have to make Jaws movies?
Was Max Landis alive at that point? This makes me wonder, because John Landis and Spielberg knew each other.
Yeah, certainly he was. This is what, 89?
Yeah, he would have had to have been.
Yeah. Maybe very young, but
Max is a pretty common name too. So
that is true as well. But I think you might be right though, if they were friends too. But like, obviously, there's the Trump parallels as well with Biff rising to power, which is
but I mean that's not the 2015.
Yeah, well, that was also in 2016. So in more ways, it predicted things about 2016 than it did about 2015, right?
Yeah.
Weird.
The 80s still being held on to as some type of cultural significance, you know?
Uh-huh. We don't quite have hoverboards yet, like in that degree. We have self-tying shoes. Or flying cars. But we do have McDonald's all-day breakfasts.
I saw that on Reddit.
You did? Yeah.
What was the other thing? Like we can't control the weather up to the minute.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have floating cameras.
If only we did.
We don't have Texaco stations anymore, and especially ones that like are robotic and can take care of your car without you having to get out.
We still have lawyers.
yeah, I forgot about that.
That was hilarious. They abolished all lawyers. You got 19 years instantly.
The one thing that was kind of funny to me is, okay, Jennifer was found in the alley. Mm-hmm. And they scanned her thumbprint, and it came up that she was older, and they're like, oh, she had, like really good reconstructive surgery. And then Doc tells Marty, well, don't go over there. What are we going to do? Tell him we're time travelers? It's like Marty could have scanned his thumb and said, hey, she's my wife. I'm taking her home.
That's true. That's true, actually.
Because they would have bought
look good too.
That he had a,
We did facial reconstruct, but they're all idiots in this, right?
Yep.
That's my wife. Pamela Anderson.
But of course, then the story wouldn't have happened, and that's the reason why they.
I guess, unfortunately, the logic.
I mean, it's not like they were able to set up the sequel the way that they wanted to, because there wasn't going to be a sequel. So
yeah. But now, speaking of which, do you think that this sequel, almost, because it's not self-contained, and 3 is very much a part of it, hell, the fucking trailer for 3 plays before the ending even, or before the end credits even happen, right?
Yeah, and that's the weird thing is I was alive, when this came out at the theater, and this was marketed as just a sequel, not a continuing story that there was going to be a third one, and people at the end booed in the theater. Well, because
it doesn't feel complete.
Right.
In a way.
Yeah, it's not even necessarily a cliffhanger, it's just like it ends, like right in the middle, to be continued. You're like, what? I paid all the money to not see it do anything? Which
is what, actually, back to Marvel, it came out today that, or yesterday, that the original script for Infinity War ended just straight up with the snap. They didn't have the aftermath. It just ended with the snap as like a cheap cliffhanger instead of a complete movie, right? A complete narrative.
Right.
Which I think also would have been bullshit. Because, because I added all of these things. We have on Discord, for those listening, our notes for the episode. You can see, Garrett, that it says edited beside the notes, right? Because I had all of the notes written before I finished the movie, and then I forgot about the sequel bait ending, and I added that last note, which is, does the sequel bait ruin the ending, like halfway through it while I was watching it. I think it was when he gets hit by lightning. I was like, this just feels off. The entire movie feels like pitch perfect almost, and then like that one just kind of makes you feel like you're not watching the whole thing.
Yep.
I don't know.
What about the SCTV alumnus that comes and delivers the package?
What was that?
The guy that delivers from the Western Union guy.
Oh, right. Was he on SCTV?
Yeah. Am I the only one that remembers him?
I've seen some SCTV.
Okay. I thought with you being Canadian, that was like something that...
Pretty much. I've seen a bit of it just because... Well...
He was the star of Maniac Mansion.
I only remember like John Candy's stuff.
And Eugene Levy, hopefully, and Rick Moranis.
Yeah.
Well, I know you remember Strange Brew.
The
McKenzie brothers.
Ah, yeah. I have their Christmas record on vinyl somewhere.
You would.
It's a Canadian staple point. And a beer.
I think it does ruin the ending.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fine. It's fine in this day and age because you can literally just put the next disc in,
yeah,
and watch the movie. Because it's not a satisfying conclusion, and then it's like you almost feel like the ending was just a trailer for the next movie. You feel like it's DLC. It's like EA made the ending. And they're like, if you actually want the movie, you're gonna have to pay more, and you're like, really? And you're gonna have to wait a year too.
Right. More fucking shit. It does. It feels really cheap though. It really does.
It does.
Which is interesting because I love this movie to death. Like I still did rate it 5 out of 5 even with that, because again, like you said, I have already seen the third one and I remember it vividly, and I could have popped it in right afterwards, but I didn't. But I can't imagine seeing it in theaters and being like subjected to that. I probably would have been as pissed as I was, maybe a little less, as I was with The Walking Dead's cliffhanger that one time.
I'm pretty sure this is why people rated this movie poorly when it came out. Is because of the feeling when you walked out of the theater, like you
didn't see a complete movie. Yeah, you're like, wait, I gotta wait for another thing. Kind of like, well, maybe if they announced it as one whole solid thing, right? Well, like this is part 2. There's part 3 coming as well. Maybe if they announced it, it would have been better. But I don't know, because I think it takes me back to like Matrix 2 and 3 as well, which are terrible movies. But you kind of knew when you were watching 2 that there would be a 3. Right?
Yeah, but it was still one of those where it's like it ends and it's like nobody says anything when the movie's over. Like the whole place is quiet and you just kind of like walk out. And it's like it just any of the fun. These are supposed to be fun movies, and any of the fun emotions, like in the first one, when the car comes screaming towards the screen when he's flying, and we don't need any roads.
Gotta go back in time.
Right. It's like you're like, yeah, it makes you feel good. But it just, you don't feel good at the end of this. You're like, oh,
right.
Ugh.
But not even in an Infinity War way, right?
Yeah, right. It's not like a dark ending.
Like,
you're like, oh my god.
Or like Empire Strikes Back is a good example because it's a complete story that still has a cliffhanger ending.
Right. It's just it's an unsatisfying ending.
Right, and it's weird because this movie even has its fucking ending, and yet they just drag it on for another like 10 minutes afterwards, right? I feel like, honestly, they could have ended it with Doc getting zapped by the lightning and disappearing, and that would have been more satisfying. But I don't know. Even then, that's a little too much, right? But then again, you have like, we gotta go to the future in the first one. It's kind of like our story's ending, but Doc just got zapped by lightning. Something else is gonna happen. I wonder if that would have lessened the blow.
I think it's because Marty is stuck in 55.
Right, he's not back in his time.
Right. It's like there's no you're stuck mid plot point.
It's not like he returned to 1985 and Doc was like off to the future, and then he got zapped by lightning, and it was like, right. Doc, you didn't go where you were supposed to. And like, why did Doc have 1885 programmed into the DeLorean?
That would have actually been more interesting if they would have went back to 85, and it's like at night or something. They specifically go back later,
or back to the exact moment right after they left, where we're going. We don't need roads, and appear, and then the DeLorean comes back and drops them off. Wow, Doc went an adventure, and then he gets zapped by lightning and disappears, and it flashes to like some neighbor where it's like, where are all these DeLoreans coming from?
I mean, because it's like the last thing we know about Jennifer is like she's just sitting on some foreign person's porch, and Doc's like, well, the time will fix everything if we're successful. And so it's like you can hold that in your head to go, okay, the heroes are going to win. Everything's going to be fine. Marty's going to get back with his girl. But at the end of the film, you still haven't seen her, and they weren't successful because Marty can't get back now. So it's like they're like leaving things to the movie. And it's like the parts of the movie make sense in the third film, and they rectify it at the end of the third film. And I think that's why I like the third film a little bit more, because it's a lot more lighthearted.
Right. And honestly, like I said, 2 and 3 fluctuate for me. I'll have to watch 3 again, and I'll probably end up going like, that is better.
I wish it needs to be like the whole Bloody Affair, where it's just like 2 and 3 are just one movie. I mean, you could just do 1, 2, 3 as one movie, and then you'd probably be safe.
Right. Well, all 3 of them can just be like stuck together, and you'd get a whole complete narrative. Yeah. Like when he flies it, well, pretty much, never mind. I was going to say when he flies to the screen, if it just cut to them in 2015, but that is the exact cut in Back to the Future Part 2. If that's what it was, they fly right at the screen and then it cuts and it's like, whoa, Marty, why does your girlfriend look different? Moving on.
Right, yeah.
Kind of like a Jim Carrey bit.
Was sort of like, with as little as she was going to have involvement in the film, they could have basically done a Crispin Glover where it was just like you don't really see her and they just put her in the alley and then go and do their thing.
But then you would have had 2 lawsuits.
Yeah, because that actually changed things, or you can't do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't.
I kind of wish, I mean, it's like, I know Zemeckis was off doing Roger Rabbit, and that's the reason why nothing was going on for those couple years. And Bob Gale wrote a screenplay about George and Lorraine being hippies in the 60s, which is fucking stupid. So that's the reason why Zemeckis was like, no.
Just called George and Lorraine.
It does make me wonder what would have happened if Crispin would have signed on, if they would have met his request for whatever it was, and if they would have actually written a script without that hindrance, what things would have been like.
It would have been way different, because the whole movie wouldn't hinge on his death, I don't think. They would have used him again.
You know, but it's also the same thing of the fact of like him having the flying car and going to the future and bringing the girl along. All that was basically a joke. It's like they didn't really want to do that. So it's like if they knew how successful the movie was going to be and that there was going to be sequels,
they would have set up a sequel a little better.
Yeah, and it's like I think that would have been
because it is kind of funny where it is kind of funny, and I made the joke too, where it's like, wow, we finally got to the future. Quick, Marty, let's dump your girlfriend in the trash and go have fun.
Right.
Let's throw her in the dumpster. Because I mean, like, could they not have just left her in the fucking DeLorean?
Yeah.
It was out of fucking power. She couldn't accidentally go anywhere. If they just left the note that said, like, stay fucking here, we'll be back in an hour.
That's the other thing about the film, is how often does the Mr. Fusion need to be refilled? Because
it doesn't really say, I guess, right?
Old man Biff
is able to travel there and back, or
back
and forward.
And then as soon as they get back to the car, Doc puts more stuff into Mr. Fusion because they're about to travel into time.
Weird. So maybe he just likes topping off.
That's it. He's autistic.
Well, probably.
I know, and that's just nitpicky stuff. I know.
Although I will say, as much as I do hate the sequel bait ending, I do like that part. Like, Doc sends Marty back to 1985, and then Marty runs around the corner. He's like, "Wait a minute, I'm back." It's kind of funny. But I'm back from the future, Doc. But unfortunately, there's no Huey Lewis news on this one, eh?
Yeah. I mean, he kind of plays it in the future. He kind of plays that on the guitar.
Which one?
Where the old Marty is sitting in the chair and he kind of like plays a little something, but it sounds terrible.
Right. Yeah, I've noticed it. It felt a little familiar, but I couldn't catch what song it was.
I'm pretty sure it's Power of Love, but I'm not entirely sure.
Probably. What else we got for this one? Anything?
That's got to be everything.
Kind of ripped through the whole thing. It was pretty good. We ripped that time travel apart for a little bit.
Yeah, and I have to say, the movie does go by really quickly.
Right? I was shocked at how fast it was all of a sudden gone. Like, it's almost paced as well as the first one. Not as good, not as well written, I think, just by a tad. But like, it's paced just as well.
Yeah.
One of the best,
certainly one of the
in history.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is certainly one of the better trilogies that they've made.
Because like, no 3 of the parts are bad.
Right.
Some of it is a little fucky, but like it missteps, but it's never bad, which is awesome. I love it. I love these movies, obviously.
I'd have never known.
And if you love these movies too, you can be sure to leave a comment down below. Tell us about what's happening in the world of you and your movies. You can also always recommend a movie to us, and maybe we'll check it out. Who knows? But if you got nothing else for this, Garrett, you got anything else for Back to the Future Part 2 then?
I do not.
Okay. In that case, you can find us down here at the Digital Drive-In every single week, where we talk about our favorite movies and what we love about them and what makes them so great. I say every single week as if we don't take the occasional week off. As always, you can follow the Digital Drive-In Podcast on Twitter at digital_podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Alex's Reviews, and you can follow Garrett on Twitter at Garrett Donardo. You can also follow both of us on Letterboxd by following the links in the description below. In addition, the Digital Drive-In Podcast is on YouTube. You can find us and all of our episodes on YouTube at the Digital Drive-In is the name of the channel, Digital Drive-In. You should see our logo pop up in there, and all of our episodes should be up relatively soon. The goal, of course, there being to get these episodes up simultaneously with our current provider, as well as to make some exclusive video content in the future. Some stuff we're very excited for. Maybe some more podcasts in the future, too. Stay tuned for that. I know Garrett and I are both kind of drafting some things that we might want to do. Isn't that right, Garrett?
That is correct.
Well, in that case, that was Back to the Future Part 2, a very, very fun sequel. And yeah, that's about it. Next week is another mystery film because we didn't decide. Bye.
Bye.